Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Exchange 2013 Deployment Decisions and Prerequisites. When it comes to an installation of Exchange 2013, there are a lot of questions that have to be answered before you even install that first Exchange 2013 server. Should you virtualize or install it on bare metal? What specifications are needed for that server, whether it's installed physically or virtualized? The specs are the same. Is your Active Directory ready for an Exchange installation? In fact, you might even be asking the question, is there a pre-existing Exchange or legacy Exchange installed in the environment? And then on the server itself, what prerequisites are needed? What other solutions have to be installed first, like the .NET Framework and so forth? So all of these different questions have to be answered first before you begin the process of installing Exchange 2013. And so that's what we need to discuss now. Okay, so let's get started. So considering the question as to whether or not there is a legacy Exchange environment in place, it's good to know what coexistence scenarios are provided for when it comes to Exchange 2013. So if you're looking at an environment that is Exchange 2003 or earlier, there is no support for coexistence. And so what that means is you cannot install an Exchange 2013 system into that environment with the hope of moving over mailboxes and moving things into a complete Exchange 2013 environment. Now, with Exchange 2007 as well as Exchange 2010, you can coexist with Exchange 2013. So ultimately what we're talking about is we install Exchange 2013 into the existing environment, then we move over mailboxes to the new Exchange servers, and then over time, once we've decided that everything is moved over and everything is working properly, then we decommission the older systems. So during the time period where you have that mixed environment, where you have, let's say, Exchange 2007 or Exchange 2010, and an Exchange 2013 server all together in one place, that's called coexistence. And the entire process of moving mailboxes and moving over services, well, that's called transitioning. It's not called upgrading. Now, you might say, well, what's the difference? Ultimately, I'm upgrading my system from Exchange 2007 or 2010 to Exchange 2013. And yes, that is true in theory, but from a technical perspective, you're not doing an in-place upgrade of your Exchange servers. In other words, you cannot install Exchange 2013 right on top of an Exchange 2007 or 2010 system. You have to go out and get new hardware or spin up a new virtual machine and start from scratch in installing Exchange 2013 into that environment. Now, in order for all of this to work, it's true 2007 and 2010 are supported, but note it says that 2007 is supported with Service Pack 3 and an update rollup. Exchange 2010 is supported with Service Pack 3. Now, it's possible your Service Pack 3 for 2010. As of the time of this recording, neither one has been provided just yet for the Exchange community. So we know that those things are going to be provided. We've been told that they will be, and then once they're available, you'll be able to then install Exchange 2013 into that existing environment. You'll be able to establish a coexistence scenario, transition things over, and then ultimately have a pure Exchange 2013 environment up and running. Now, as mentioned, you have to have a new box in play or a new virtual machine in play in order to install Exchange. So what are the hardware requirements for such a system? So from a hardware perspective, the processor itself has to be x64 architecture based with Intel or AMD 64 based platform. Intel Itanium IA64 is not supported. As far as memory is concerned, if you're installing the mailbox server role, you need 8 GB as a minimum. If you're installing just the client access server role, you need 4 GB as a minimum. And then if you're combining the two, a mailbox server role and client access server role together on the same system, you need 8 GB of memory as a minimum. Now, as far as the disk, you'll need 30 GB on the drive that you install Exchange. As far as additional disk space, Obviously, with your mailbox server, you want to provide as much disk space as you need for your environment. That takes into consideration the number of users that you have. It also takes into consideration whatever quotas you have established, or if you decide to go with unlimited mailboxes, which some companies do. So it really just depends in terms of the amount of space that you need. And of course, that space can grow. You can add additional storage to your server. We'll talk about virtualization in a moment, but in terms of installing an operating system to work with Exchange 2013, let's run down the list of the operating systems that are currently supported. Okay, so for your mailbox or client access server roles, or both, you can install Exchange 2013 on a server that's running Windows Server 2012, Standard or Data Center, or Windows Server 2008 R2, Standard with SP1, Enterprise with SP1, or Data Center RTM or later. Now, as far as installing the management tools themselves, you can install these tools on a system running Server 2012, Standard, or Data Center, and then all of the same servers that you can install Exchange on, of course, 2008 R2, Standard, Enterprise, and Data Center. But you can also install the management tools on the 64-bit edition of Windows 8 or the 64-bit edition of Windows 7 with Service Pack 1. So if you're using another version of server, let's say Server 2008 or Server 2003 R2 or Server 2003, none of those server operating systems are supported when it comes to installing Exchange 2013. Virtualization of Exchange can be a huge topic to discuss and consider. There's a lot to think about, so we're going to try to break this down into a grouping of bullet points to keep in mind if you decide to virtualize your Exchange environment. For starters, it's good for you to know that both server roles are supported. So you can virtualize the client access server role and the mailbox server role. There's no problem in doing that. Microsoft supports both. One thing you need to make sure you do, however, is use an approved vendor. So you might say, well, what's an approved vendor? Microsoft has an entire list of vendors that are approved for virtualizing Exchange. And so with a little bit of research, you can see if your vendor is supported. All of the major vendors are supported. So if you're using Hyper-V, that's of course Microsoft's hypervisor solution, that's supported. If you're using VMware's vSphere, or if you're using Citrix Xen, all of those are supported. So it's really not going to be difficult to find an approved vendor, but you just want to make sure. So it's really not going to be too difficult to find an approved vendor. Another important point is to make sure you don't oversubscribe the system or use dynamic memory to overcommit what you don't have. So it's very important when you put together a virtual system for Exchange that you make sure you provide the right hardware requirements. If the server calls for 8 gigabytes of RAM, you make sure you give it 8 gigabytes of RAM. You do not want to take a system and use something like dynamic memory because it doesn't work properly with Exchange. Even though you might see good results with other servers, it's not something that works well with Exchange. So don't do that and don't oversubscribe. In other words, if you have a server that, let's say, has 16 gigabytes of RAM, a lot of times what happens when you're creating virtual machines is you might want to put one more server on a server that has virtualization enabled. So you look and you say, I really don't have any more space on this server. I really don't have any more capacity in terms of the hardware. I don't have enough memory, or I don't have enough processor power. So you start to shortchange the other VMs, and that's when you start to oversubscribe when it comes to your virtual servers. So again, make sure you provide the right hardware for that server, for the Exchange server, and do not oversubscribe on your virtualized servers. The next point is with the mailbox server role, you want to use either SCSI pass-through disk or iSCSI disks, and the point there is that even though it's also supported for you to use VHD disks where you can have it as direct attached storage, or it can be right on the server itself, you can do that, and in very small environments it's not really going to make a difference. But one of the big concerns with virtualization has always been the performance of the mailbox server role, and so the best thing is to eliminate that concern by putting the storage, the databases, the mailboxes, putting that on SCSI or iSCSI disks that will avoid the performance hit that you would take if you put it directly on the server itself. Another important point And the last one we'll leave you with is that snapshots are not supported, nor are certain migration techniques. And so what's important to take away from that is that sometimes folks use snapshots as a backup technique, but in the case of Exchange, this is not a valid backup technique. You'll need to do real backups of your data, or you can work with a high availability solution. A database availability group is a good option for your high availability solution. It's built right into Exchange, and you'll be able to make sure your data is redundant. The other point to keep in mind is that certain migration techniques are not supported as well. So what do we mean by that? Well, Exchange Server virtual machines, they can be part of a database availability group for high availability, and that provides for automatic failover or for manual switchovers to other systems. However, you can utilize host-based failover clustering and migration technology, but that only works if the virtual machines are configured so that they don't save and restore data on the disk when moved or taken offline. So the failover activity occurring at the hypervisor level, this must result in what Microsoft calls a cold boot when the virtual machine is activated on the target node. The next part of the process in preparing your environment for Exchange 2013 is to make sure your Active Directory is prepared. So for starters, you need to make sure your Active Directory forest and domain functional levels are at least Server 2003. Every Active Directory site that we deploy Exchange in must have at least one domain controller and a global catalog server. Read-only domain controllers are not supported in this case. And you need to prepare the schema either before or during the install process, which must be done in the same site as the Active Directory schema master. So that's important to keep in mind. The schema is the actual structure behind Active Directory in terms of where objects are placed and the various attributes that are added to those objects. And so this is something that typically with each release of Exchange has to be updated. Now, you can do this during the install process. If you run through the install wizard, it will reach a point where it realizes that the schema has not been updated, and it will go forward and do that for you. In smaller environments, that's fine. It's not a problem to have the install process update the schema at the same time. However, in certain environments, larger organizations, or simply organizations where there's a process in place where they say, look, we want you to break this up and update the schema first before you do any installs. If that's the policy of your organization, big or small, then that's not possible if you're doing the wizard-based install process all by itself. In order to update just the schema, you have to go through the command line. So let's look at a few command line options for installing Exchange 2013. Okay, so for starters, you can prepare the schema using the following: setup space / prepare schema, or you can use the / PS. In doing that, it will just prepare the schema. It will not do an installation of Exchange. However, at the same time, you can go forward and you can prepare Active Directory as well as prepare the domain itself. And so there are other commands that you can use. You can prepare the schema and the Active Directory together using the setup space / prepare AD space / organization name, and that's where you put in the name of the organization. Now, if you don't run this command, that's okay. You can do it during the install process, and it actually asks you for the name of the organization in one of the wizard dialog boxes. If you do this first, however, when you run the wizard to do the installation of Exchange, because you still have to run that wizard, but when you run that wizard, it can see if this command has been run or not. So it can see if the schema has been prepared, and if the Active Directory has been prepared, and if you've put in the name of the organization or not. So in doing the install process and going through the wizard, it knows if any of these other things have taken place. And so if the organization name has not been put in Active Directory, then it will ask you for that in the wizard. If it has been put into Active Directory, then it won't ask you for that. Then it realizes that there's no point in giving you that dialog box, and so it will not show you the organization name. This is actually an interesting troubleshooting point, because when you do an install of Exchange, if you're installing an Exchange server that, let's say, is not the first Exchange server, but it's the second, third, fourth, or whatever, if it brings up the dialog box asking for the organization name, that indicates that there's a problem between the connection of the Exchange server and Active Directory. Because if Exchange is already there, or if the organization name has already been put in, then there's no reason why it should show you a dialog box asking you for organization name. That means that it doesn't know that the organization already exists. And that's a problem. And typically those types of problems relate back to network connectivity, whether it be physical or whether or not it's your IP address settings or your DNS configuration. So in some way, your server is not communicating well with the Active Directory environment. So you have to find out why. But in addition to preparing the schema and preparing the Active Directory, you also need to prepare the domains. Now, you need to prepare the domain for every domain that's going to have an Exchange server installed. So you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can type in setup/prepare domain, which will prepare the local domain, that is the domain that the server you're doing this on is actually part of. Or you can do setup/prepare domain and then put in the FQDN of the specific domain to prepare. Or you can just type setup/prepare all domains, which will just make sure that all domains are prepared. If you have a single domain environment, you can just run setup/prepare domain or prepare all domains, and it takes just a matter of moments for this to be done. So if you're looking at this and thinking, if this all works through the wizard, why would I want to do this any other way? Again, it comes down to the policies of your organization and sometimes the size of your organization. If your organization is quite large, it is better to prepare the schema, the Active Directory, and the domains ahead of time. Now, if you wanted to boil this down to just 2 commands that you can use instead of remembering all of these, you can run the prepare AD and the prepare all domains. You can run the /prepare AD, and that takes care of your schema and Active Directory. And then you can run the /prepare all domains. And so just with those 2 commands, you pretty much take care of all of the setup work for your Active Directory before doing the actual install. Now in our case, we're going to work through the wizard in order to prepare the Active Directory and let it go through and prepare the domain as well. We have a very small environment that we're working with SpyTech Prime, and so we're not so concerned with using the command line. However, just so you have an opportunity to see how this works, let's jump over to our server and let's do the schema preparation using the command line. This way you have an idea as far as how you would actually do this if you were going to run through the various commands. And so running the setup/prepare schema will give you an idea as to how this would work if you needed to run all of the different commands for your environment. So we'll just run the one, and that'll give you an idea, and then the rest we'll do through the actual wizard itself. Alright, and here we are on our Windows Server 2012 system. And so at this point, what we've done is we have taken the ISO file for Exchange 2013, and we have it set up here. We've mounted it on this server. It's a virtual server, so we pretty much just use the settings in order to connect into that ISO file. And so here we have the files here. If we open that up, we can scroll down and we can see where that setup file is. And so we're going to be using this setup application right here in order to update the schema. Before we do that, we need to make a change in terms of the settings. We need to import a module, and then we need to install a Windows feature, the RSAT-ADDS feature. And so basically this is for the remote set of tools. So if we open up our PowerShell here, what we're going to do is we're going to type install Windows feature RSAT-ADDS. Now, if you're working on Server 2008, before you actually use the add Windows feature, you're going to do import-module space server manager as one word, server manager. So that's something you're probably familiar with if you've worked with 2008 already, that you have to add the module. With 2012, you don't have to do that, and you don't use the add-Windows feature. Instead, you use the install-Windows feature RSAT-ADDS. We hit enter. And we can see we were successful. Our remote server administration tools have been installed, and so we can move forward. It does give us a warning that our Windows Update is not turned on, and we'll turn that on, but we don't have to worry about that at this moment. So we have success there. The next part of the process is to use the setup command with the prepare schema. So let's clear the screen. And let's open up a command prompt. From the start screen, we type in CMD. It gives us a command prompt. We want an administrative command prompt, so we're going to hit Control-Shift-Enter to open up the admin command prompt. And from here, we're going to go to the D drive. From the D drive, we're going to type in setup/prepare schema, and we'll hit enter. Now you'll notice that it says that there's no problem with using the prepare schema switch. It's not giving us an error message, it's giving us information. Pretty much, in order to move forward, we have to accept the license agreement. And so this is something that's new with the command prompt with preparing schema, preparing Active Directory, and preparing domains, is that we have to put in the switch that says we accept the Exchange Server license terms. So let's do that. We hit the up arrow, we get the command back, and then we put in the /I accept Exchange Server license terms, and we hit enter. And we can see that it did a prerequisite analysis, and we completed that, and now it's extending the Active Directory schema. Okay, and so you see how easy that was. The schema was extended, we're all set to go forward. So if we wanted to, we could use the prepare AD and the prepare all domains switches in order to move forward and prepare our entire Active Directory. But at this time, we're going to switch back to our slides. Let's talk about some of the other prerequisites that are needed in order to install Exchange. And then when we do the Exchange installation, it will do the rest of the preparing of Active Directory. And that's why when we do the installation, it will ask us what our organization name is, because we won't be putting it in here. So it's just two different ways to install Exchange. It's not a big deal. It really comes down to whatever policies are in play in your organization, as well as perhaps whatever permission structures are in play in order to make sure that persons who have certain responsibilities can go forward and do their jobs. So we're not going to focus too much on that. We've installed the schema updates. We're great there. Let's talk about what other prerequisites are needed and how we can accomplish the installation of those prerequisites. In order to set up your Exchange server, you have to install certain prerequisites. So there are different prerequisites for a server running Server 2012 as opposed to one running Server 2008 R2. And what's nice about this is that Microsoft provides the prerequisites as part of a web page for the setup of your Exchange server that we're going to take a look at this point so that you can see the differences in terms of the commands that you run and the different features that get installed, as well as the extra pieces that you have to install. So one of the reasons why I like the idea of installing Exchange Server 2013 on Server 2012 is that it's actually less to worry about in terms of prerequisites. With Server 2008 R2, you'll see that there's a lot more that you have to download and install. So we're going to use the prerequisite commands that are provided by Microsoft in order to make the deployment easier through PowerShell. Some might say, well, shouldn't you at least one time do the installation with all of the different roles and features specifically set up so that you do it manually? And my answer to that is no. Why would you do that? If it's already broken down into a command that you can just pop into PowerShell and do the installation that way, then that's the best way to do it. There's no reason to make this harder than it already is. Now, it is good to take note of what is being installed in terms of roles and features, so that in the event something goes wrong, you know where to go and how to fix these things, and perhaps to reinstall a role or feature that didn't get installed during that process. But typically the process works just fine, and it's very rare that I see any problems with the command not finishing. So let's jump over to our server. We'll take a look at what the TechNet site says regarding the prerequisites, and then we'll go through on our server and we'll install these prerequisites using PowerShell, and we will install the various extra components that have to be installed on our server. Alright, so at this point, to do the prerequisites, we'll close out of the command prompt, and what we're going to do is we're going to open up Internet Explorer. We'll do a quick search for Exchange 2013 prereqs. Here we see the Exchange 2013 prerequisites from the technet.microsoft.com site. That's what we're looking for. Alright, so it gives us some information. As we scroll down, here we see Active Directory preparation, and we see that we had to install the remote tools, which we did. And then you can see that we have Server 2012 prerequisites, Server 2008 R2SP1 prerequisites. So in our case, we're installing a Server 2012 system. This server will be a mailbox server role combined with the client access server role. So you expand this out, and here you can see exactly what we're going to need to do. And then depending on the server that you're installing, if we look here at the Server 2008 prerequisites, you can see that there's some things that we would have to do there. You can see if we expand out the mailbox server role that there's quite a bit more that we have to install in addition to running the command here. So that's one of the reasons, again, why I like to install it on 2012. You only have to install 3 things afterwards. So you can see it says Open Windows PowerShell, which we already have opened, and it says Run the command. So all you have to do is click Copy, Allow Access, go back over to your PowerShell, right-click, and it's pretty much all set. There's the command, and you'll note if we go through this, it says Install Windows Feature, and you can look at all of the different features that are being installed, including the desktop experience, the .NET Framework 4.5 features, RPC over HTTP proxy. So you can look through and see all of the different features and roles that are going to be installed here, but by doing it this way, it's much quicker than if you had to install all of this manually. So we're good to go, and we hit Enter. And it says that we completed everything. It says that we were successful, and we need to do a restart. So at this point, we will restart the server before we proceed with the installation of the added pieces. Just to look at those again, if we close this out, we have to install the Microsoft Unified Communications Managed API 4.0 Core Runtime 64-bit, the Microsoft Office 2010 Filter Pack 64-bit, and then the Service Pack 1 for that filter pack. Now in our case, we already have this downloaded here. If we go to downloads, they're already there. So after the reboot, we're just going to come back and install these. Now you have to install them in the right order. So we'll install the UCMA runtime first, then the filter pack, then the Service Pack 1. And that will pretty much finish out our prerequisites. And for those of you who are not sure how to restart your servers, because it is different with Server 2012, you pretty much have to get the charms bar to come out. A little harder to do in a virtualized system. So there's our charms bar. We click Settings, we click Power, and here we can restart the server. It says if we want to put in a reason, and in this case we've done an installation, so we can scroll down, Application Installation, Continue. And we're back up and running. Okay, so we've installed the prerequisites by going through the PowerShell command for that. We could go back and make sure everything was installed properly. That would be fine. We could go to Event Viewer at this point and check to see if there's any installation errors or any type of problem that we might see. But typically when we go forward and do the install, if anything is wrong, it will come back and let us know. So at this point, we're going to move forward and install the pieces that are left in order to get the prerequisites installed properly. So we go to our desktop, we're going to go to the Downloads folder, and you recall we downloaded these items ahead of time. Obviously you can download them to your server, put them in a folder that you can utilize for other Exchange servers. It depends on the number of Exchange servers that you're installing. You might want to keep these for future installations. We'll just kick off this Unified Communications API. We'll click Next, agree to the license terms. At this point, we won't send information about our setup experiences. We'll click Install. And that's pretty much it. And then we'll kick off the filter pack. Click Next. Accept the license agreement and click Next. And we're good there. And last but not least, we'll do the service pack. Again, we'll accept the license terms. Click Continue. And we're good. Okay, so it doesn't tell us to do a reboot, but the installation probably won't go forward unless we do a reboot. Sometimes if you try to push an installation of Exchange forward before your system is ready for it, before you do the reboots, it will stop you and say, hey, this system is waiting on a reboot. So rather than get that error message halfway through the install, let's just reboot the system now, and while the system is rebooting, we'll jump back over to our slides and let's talk about a few additional tools that can be helpful when it comes to preparing for an Exchange deployment. Because at this point, the Active Directory is set and we've updated the schema. The server itself is ready for the installation of Exchange 2013. Here we've installed the prerequisites, including making sure that we have the various roles and features installed, as well as the Unified Communications API and the Filter Pack and Service Pack 1. So we have everything in play to now do the installation of Exchange 2013. So we'll jump back over to the slides and talk about some additional tools that can be helpful in different types of deployments, especially larger deployments where you may need more information or more assistance in order to deploy Exchange properly. So before we conclude this lesson, I wanted to make sure that you knew about the various tools that were available. So this is one tool that's available. It's an online Exchange Server Deployment Assistant. And it's really a great tool for installing Exchange, whether you're doing it on premises, going with cloud only, or going with a hybrid environment. The only reason I'm not showing you how to work with the tool at this point is because it still hasn't been updated yet for Exchange 2013. My hope is by the time you see this that the tool has been updated and shows you exactly step by step how to install Exchange 2013 in your environment. So basically you go to the website that's listed here, or you can do a quick search for it, and you click the on-premises only button. You answer a few questions as to what features you're looking for and what environment you currently have, and then it pretty much spits out the end result as far as what you need to do in a step-by-step fashion. So it's an excellent tool that's been given to us by the Exchange team. In fact, I recommend whenever you do a real-world deployment, you utilize this tool just to make sure you don't forget anything. There are little nitty-gritty features to an install of Exchange that you might just forget in the heat of the moment, and so a tool like this really helps to keep you on point and helps to make sure that you have everything mapped out and the order that it has to be mapped out and installed so that you can do the install with minimal stress and do it properly. Another great tool that you can search for and download is the Mailbox Server Role Requirements Calculator. This is a tool that was created by Ross Smith IV. He works on the Exchange development team, and it's really a great tool in terms of being able to see what your needs are with regard to the number of users you have, the types of users that they are based upon their profile, and then how much storage you're going to need, how many servers you're going to need. And so even though it's just an Excel spreadsheet, it's been designed really well to help you with your mailbox requirements. So you can download this tool for free. You just do a quick search for it and you can download the spreadsheet, and then it pretty much walks you through how you would utilize the various tabs that are there at the bottom in order to design your storage, your backup, and so forth. Again, the reason I'm not demonstrating the Exchange 2013 version of the tool is because at this point it's still Exchange 2010. So we're waiting for the updates to this tool as well. Just a few other tools to help you with your Exchange deployment. There's a tool called JetStress, which simulates the Exchange database and log disk I/O load. So you want to use JetStress if you want to verify the disk system that you've put in place, if you want to make sure that it's stable and will perform as you hope. And so this is a great tool for that. Another good tool is Load Generator, which is a benchmarking and stress test tool to help you simulate actual mail load to see if your system is set up well for the load that you're expecting to come in. And then we have the Profile Analyzer, which lets administrators collect statistical information for capacity planning performance, and health of a mailbox server. So these are great tools to help you with your Exchange deployment, especially if you have a larger deployment and if you need to make sure that the design you've chosen is the right one for your environment. So that's pretty much it in terms of the decisions you need to make and the prerequisites that you need to have in place. The only thing left to do now is install Exchange 2013. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.